What if I told you that the power to create wealth from absolutely nothing has always been inside of you, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment you finally recognize it? What if I told you that this secret was not whispered in books, not taught in classrooms, but lived, demonstrated, and proven by those who discovered that reality itself bends to the arrangement of your inner world? What you're about to hear is not just advice. It is not motivational fluff. It is the same principle that transformed beggars into millionaires, the unemployed into creators of fortune, the desperate into masters of destiny. And it begins with one man, a mysterious teacher whose very presence carried the weight of eternity, a man who looked into Neville Goddard's eyes before Neville could even introduce himself and said the words, "You are late, 6 months late, but right on time." This is the story of Abdullah, a teacher who revealed to Neville the real key to riches, a technique so precise that it cut through every excuse and stripped away every illusion about poverty, luck, or circumstance. Abdullah taught Neville, and through him, the world, that the reason people remain trapped in lack is not because they don't work hard enough, not because opportunities pass them by, but because they have never dared to face the self that keeps recreating poverty over and over again. Today, I will show you how this same principle applies to your life. I will guide you through the exact process Neville used to transform from a broke dancer during the Great Depression into one of the most influential teachers of consciousness in modern history. I will share how Abdullah's method can take you from wishing and hopping for money into the certainty of possessing it, no matter where you are starting from. But I warn you, this is not for the faint of heart. Because once you hear this, you will never again be able to blame external circumstances for your situation. Once you understand this, you will know with absolute clarity that wealth, opportunity, and freedom are choices of identity, and that the self you have been living as is the only barrier between you and the life you desire. If you are ready to face that truth, then let's begin. New York City, 1931. The Great Depression was suffocating dreams everywhere. Millions were jobless, hungry, desperate. Among them was a young man named Neville Goddard, who had once tried to make his way as a dancer, only to find himself unemployed, broke, and searching for meaning. He heard whispers of a mystic in the city, an imposing Ethiopian rabbi named Abdullah, who spoke of ancient truths in a way that stirred something inside those who heard him. In his desperation, Neville sought him out. He walked into a lecture hall, uncertain of what he would find. There, sitting before him, was Abdullah. His presence was commanding, his eyes piercing as though they could see not just Neville, but every version of Neville across time. Before Neville could speak, before he could even announce his name, Abdullah looked at him and declared, "You are 6 months late." Neville blinked, confused. "I beg your pardon." "The brothers told me you would come," Abdullah said, "and you are late, 6 months late. But right on time." It was at that moment that Neville realized he was standing before no ordinary man. How could this stranger know who he was? How could he know Neville's destiny before a single word was spoken? Neville would soon discover that Abdullah was not reading facts. He was reading consciousness. Abdullah understood that every event, every meeting, every so-called coincidence is born out of the invisible arrangement of awareness itself. He had trained his mind to such precision that he could see the currents of destiny unfolding before his eyes. And for the next 5 years, Neville would sit under this man's teaching, absorbing wisdom that would shatter the chains of poverty forever. But the most life-changing lesson did not come from rituals or esoteric texts. It came from one simple truth Abdullah repeated over and over again. "Neville, you must first start with self. Find self. Don't be ashamed ever of the being you are. Discover it and start the changing of that self." Pause for a moment and let those words sink in, because this is where so many fail. People chase wealth without ever daring to look at the self that is creating their current situation. They want money, but deep inside, they carry assumptions that repel it. They affirm abundance, but beneath the words lives a consciousness addicted to lack. They work harder and harder, but the inner identity they protect remains the same, and so nothing changes. Abdullah taught Neville the most radical truth of all. You cannot create wealth from the consciousness of poverty. You cannot think, feel, and expect as the poor self and somehow attract riches. You must start with self, discover it, accept it without shame, and then transform it completely. This was not philosophy. This was psychological surgery. Neville began practicing what Abdullah called uncritical observation of self. Every day, he observed his thoughts, his assumptions, his automatic reactions to money and opportunity. And what he found shocked him. He discovered a self who was secretly ashamed to want wealth, who believed that rich people were greedy, who thought money was a kind of corruption. He found a self who assumed rejection, who unconsciously expected limitation, who wore poverty like a hidden badge of identity. This poor self was not just in his conscious thoughts, it was in his posture, in his speech, in his automatic reactions. It lived in the very structure of his mind. And then Abdullah spoke words that changed everything. Your description of the world is a confession of the self you do not know. Every time Neville complained of lack, he was confessing his poverty consciousness. Every time he blamed the economy, he was protecting the poor self. Every time he described opportunity as scarce, he was giving voice to the very identity that kept him trapped. Abdullah would not let him escape this truth. He told Neville again and again, "There is no cause outside the arrangement of your own mind. If you are poor, it is not because of the economy, not because of luck, not because of others. It is because of the arrangement of beliefs and assumptions in your consciousness." This truth hit Neville like a thunderbolt. Brutal, yes, but liberating. Because if poverty was created by consciousness, then it could be changed by consciousness. That was the beginning of Neville's transformation. Neville would later write that this period of honest self-observation was the most uncomfortable yet necessary stage of his life. Because when you finally stop excusing your conditions and instead turn the light of awareness inward, what you see is rarely flattering. He admitted that the self he discovered was not noble or spiritual. It was weak, fearful, ashamed. A self that secretly envied the wealthy while pretending to despise them. A self that longed for abundance but felt unworthy to hold it. Most people never face this moment. They want change, but they cannot bear to look at the raw truth of the self they are protecting. They prefer to say, "The system is unfair," or "I was born into struggle," or "It's just bad luck." But Abdullah knew these were excuses of the poor self, excuses designed to keep a person safe inside their identity of lack. He told Neville bluntly, "The acceptance of self is the essence of the moral problem of the world. Until you accept the self you are, you cannot change it." This was the first step, acceptance, not judgment, not condemnation, but honest acknowledgement. Neville had to accept that he was the self who had created poverty. He had to own it without excuse. And then, only then, could he begin to change. But here was the radical part of Abdullah's teaching. He did not tell Neville to fight against this poor self. He did not suggest suppressing it, rejecting it, or trying to destroy it. He taught him something far more powerful: become a different self entirely. This was identity transformation at the deepest level. Not hopping for change, not pretending, not layering affirmations over fear, but reconstructing the very feeling of I, Abdullah said. When the self is accepted, then you can start to change. But you must accept it first. You must see clearly who you are now, and then you must assume the being you choose to become. Neville began this process with daily exercises of assumption. He would sit quietly and imagine himself not as a man trying to become wealthy, but as one who already was. He would practice walking, speaking, and thinking as if his riches were already his. But the key test, Abdullah reminded him, was not in the imagination alone, it was in the reactions. Your reactions will tell you if you have truly changed the self, Abdullah said. This was the difference between daydreaming and transformation. If Neville imagined wealth but still reacted with anxiety whenever money was mentioned, he had not changed. If he pictured abundance but still felt resentment when seeing wealthy people, the poor self still ruled his consciousness. The true sign of transformation was automatic reaction. When he no longer thought of wealth but from wealth. When anxiety gave way to calm, envy gave way to appreciation, fear gave way to certainty. That was when he would know he had changed the feeling of I. Now Neville admitted that in the beginning it felt strange. It felt fake. He felt like he was lying to himself when he tried to assume wealth, and that is where most people give up. They feel that sense of pretense and conclude it doesn't work. But Abdullah explained that feeling fake was not a sign of failure. It was a sign that the old self was being challenged. Do not run from it, he said. Sit with it. Let it teach you what self you have been living as. Then move into the new self with calm certainty. This was not a game of forcing belief. It was a process of shifting identity. But Neville made a mistake you might be making right now. He would assume wealth in imagination, but then, the moment he left his exercises, he would return to talking about his lack. He would slip back into the old conversations, the old complaints, the old descriptions of poverty. And Abdullah would not tolerate it. He corrected Neville with one of his most radical methods, the method Neville later called closed-door consciousness. And this moment would test everything Neville had learned. Abdullah's training reached its most challenging stage when he introduced Neville to what he called the discipline of closed-door consciousness. This was not a technique of imagination, but a way of living. It meant closing the door of awareness to every voice, every appearance, every circumstance that contradicted the new identity. It meant refusing to feed the old self with the energy of attention. Neville had been good at imagining wealth in moments of quiet, but the rest of the day he still entertained conversations of lack. He complained of bills. He worried about opportunities. He wondered aloud when things would change. Each time he did, Abdullah would cut him short. "You are still the poor self," he said. "You are trying to have wealth without being wealth. That will never work." Closed-door consciousness required Neville to discipline his inner dialogue. He could no longer casually speak about being broke. He could no longer indulge in thoughts of waiting for change. He had to speak and think as the wealthy man now. Abdullah's instruction was mercilessly direct. Do not discuss your desire with anyone. Do not beg God for what is already yours. Assume the state of the wish fulfilled and shut the door. Leave the old world outside. It was during this time that Neville faced one of the greatest tests of his life. He longed to return to his family in Barbados for Christmas, but he had no money for passage. By all appearances, it was impossible. Yet when he mentioned this to Abdullah, hopping for sympathy, Abdullah responded with thunder in his voice. "You are already in Barbados." Neville thought he misunderstood. "But I am here in New York," he said. "No," Abdullah corrected. "You are already in Barbados. Walk as though you are there. Live as though it is so." From that night on, Abdullah would not let Neville enter his home and speak of being in New York. Each evening when Neville arrived, Abdullah greeted him as if he had just come from Barbados. He insisted that Neville accept the feeling of already being there. If Neville tried to argue, Abdullah would slam the door in his face. "You are in Barbados," he would shout through the door. It was maddening at first. Neville wanted to explain the facts, the price of the ticket, his lack of money, the impossibility of it, but Abdullah would not listen. To him, those were the lies of the poor self. "Stop thinking of being in Barbados," he said. "Think from being in Barbados." So Neville surrendered. Each night he imagined the salt air, the warmth of the tropics, the joy of reunion with his family. He did not beg for it, he lived from it. He walked through New York as though it were Bridgetown. He fell asleep each night hearing the sound of the Caribbean Sea. He became, in feeling, the man who had already traveled. And then the miracle happened. Just before Christmas, without asking or planning, Neville received a letter. His brother had sent him a ticket to Barbados and money for expenses. The impossible had arranged itself. He boarded the ship not as a poor man hopping for a gift, but as the very self Abdullah had trained him to be, the man already in Barbados. This experience burned the lesson into him forever. It was not about wishing, not about waiting, not about hopping. It was about becoming. The law responded to identity, not to need. When he shifted the feeling of I from being in New York without money to being in Barbados with family, the outer world reorganized itself to match. But notice, this transformation did not come easily. Neville fought against it at first. He clung to facts, he defended lack, he wanted permission to keep the old self alive. Abdullah gave him none. He slammed the door, he cut him off, he refused to indulge pity. This was the radical discipline of closed-door consciousness. You see, the poor self always wants to explain, to justify, to be understood. It wants to tell the story of why things are hard, why circumstances are unfair, why nothing changes. And as long as you allow that story, you feed the old identity. Abdullah knew that story had to die. That is why he told Neville, "You cannot serve two masters. You cannot be both the poor self and the wealthy self. Choose this day whom you will serve." Neville chose, and that choice changed everything. When he returned from Barbados, something inside him was unshakable. He had tasted the reality of assumption. He had seen the world bend to his identity. He knew that he had not simply manifested a ticket, he had manifested a new self. A self that expected life to rearrange itself to match his assumption. From that moment forward, he began teaching others what Abdullah had drilled into him. That the world is self-pushed out. That circumstances are shadows of inner states. That wealth, love, opportunity, everything, flows not to those who beg for it, but to those who are it in consciousness. And Neville would go on to test this law over and over again, in every area of life. Each time, the pattern was the same. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, shut the door to contradiction, and live as though it is already done. But the lesson was never easy because the poor self always fights to stay alive. It whispers doubts. It insists on facts. It clings to the old story. That is why most people never cross the threshold. They want change without identity shift. They want abundance without dying to lack. Abdullah knew the truth. Until you kill the poor self, the wealthy self cannot live. By the time Neville returned from Barbados, he was no longer the same man. Outwardly, little had changed. He was still the son of a modest family. He was still an actor with an uncertain career. But inwardly, something irreversible had taken place. He had proven to himself that identity, not circumstance, was the true source of change. And once you prove this to yourself even once, you can never go back to believing in luck, chance, or struggle. The poor self had been exposed. It had been silenced. And in its place, the wealthy self began to rise. This was not simply about money. Wealth, as Neville came to understand, is a state of consciousness, a knowing that life provides, that you already are supplied, that nothing is withheld from you. From this state, money, opportunity, and recognition flow as naturally as air flows into your lungs. Abdullah reminded Neville again and again, you don't have to fight for wealth. You only have to assume it. And when you assume it fully, the world has no choice but to reflect it. So how do you do this? How do you, sitting where you are right now, make the same shift? Neville outlined it as a process anyone can follow. Step 1, accept the self you currently are. Stop pretending. Stop excusing. Stop explaining away your situation. Be brutally honest. If you are broke, say, I am the broke self. If you are anxious, say, I am the anxious self. Not to condemn yourself, but to see clearly. Because until you identify the self you are being, you cannot change it. Step 2, choose the self you will become. This is not about asking for something outside yourself. It is about claiming a new identity. If wealth is what you desire, then choose to be the wealthy self. Feel into what that means. How would you think? How would you walk? How would you react? The choice must be definite. Wavering between two selves will keep you trapped. Step 3, assume the feeling of that self. Close your eyes and enter imagination. Do not see yourself trying to become wealthy. See yourself already there. Feel the relief, the freedom, the security, the joy. Let that feeling wash over you until it becomes natural. Neville called this living in the end. You live from the end result, not toward it. Step 4, shut the door. This is where most fail. They imagine wealth for 10 minutes but then spend the rest of the day talking about lack. That is serving two masters. You must discipline your inner conversations. No more casual complaining. No more retelling the story of struggle. From now on, you only feed the new identity. This is closed-door consciousness. Step 5, watch for the shift in reaction. The true test is not whether you can imagine vividly, but whether your reactions change. Do you feel calm when a bill arrives instead of fearful? Do you bless the success of others instead of envying them? Do you carry a quiet certainty instead of desperation? These are signs the new self is taking root. And when that new self is established, the outer world bends. Doors open. People call. Opportunities arrive. Money finds you. But it happens not because you begged for it, it happens because you are it. Neville's entire life became proof of this. He went from being a penniless immigrant to a man who lived in comfort, traveled the world, and spoke to thousands who sought his teaching. But he never claimed the credit for himself. He always pointed back to the law and to the uncompromising guidance of Abdullah, who refused to let him serve two selves. And now that choice is in your hands. Who will you serve today? The poor self who clings to facts and fears, or the wealthy self who knows it is already done? The law is not partial. It does not favor Neville more than you. It simply reflects the self you choose to be. So here is the challenge. Tonight, when you lie down to sleep, do not fall asleep as the self who is waiting. Fall asleep as the self who already has. Enter that scene in imagination, not with strain but with ease. Hear what you would hear, see what you would see, feel what you would feel if it were already yours. Drift into sleep in that state and shut the door on every contradiction. Do this not once, not twice, but until it feels natural, until it feels like home, until the poor self no longer has a voice. And then watch as the world rearranges itself in ways you could never have planned. Because the truth is simple. You are not here to beg life for scraps. You are here to create. You are here to express the fullness of who you are. And when you choose to become the wealthy self in consciousness, abundance flows, not as a favor, but as law. So stop waiting. Stop explaining. Stop serving two selves. Choose now, assume now, live now. And remember the words that guided Neville through every test. You are already there. Walk as though it is so.